Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for this Lunch and Learn. We've got a treat for you today. You'll be learning about muscadines from Dr. Sarah Lauder. She is the Extension Viticulture Specialist and an Assistant Professor of Horticulture over at UGA. So she has served as Georgia's Extension Viticulture Specialist for both bunch and muscadines, and she works mostly with growers to support the grape industry, but focuses on a lot of down-to-earth stuff that will help homeowners, which is why she's here today. And so she also teaches some college courses over there on grape production, and co-leads a study abroad program in Italy, and she also oversees the UJ Wine Grower Internship Program for those that might want to look into that. And she connects students with vineyards for some real world experiences. She's from North Carolina. But I've had the pleasure of being in her presence, and she is a wonderful speaker. And this is only the first part, so we'll have the second part of this series, this Muscadine series, as a workshop in December 6th, and it'll be over at Vines Community Garden. And we have some muscadine grapes over there that she is going to do some rehab on, and then some new ones. So anybody, and this is open to anyone watching, if you want to travel here to Gwinnett County, so not just county residents if you're interested in that, but if you have muscadines or you know anyone who has muscadines that would like a little bit more hands-on, that would be the program to come to. And you can always reach out to me later if you would like to get involved in that, although it should be up on the extension calendar. And you can sign up for that now. I believe that is actually up and active. That registration link is active now. So I have got everybody in here. We are recording, and I will let you take it away. So please go ahead and start. Thank you.
Great. Awesome. So I'm very excited to be here and talking about muscadines. I grew up enjoying muscadines, and so I'm really excited that I now get to work with them because it makes it a lot easier to eat them all the time. Um, but when I'm working with different people that are producing muscadines, there we go. There's a couple of common themes that I get, especially when it comes to a little bit more of a homeowner crowd. And one, it's what kind of muscadine is this? Or is it, I have these muscadines and they're not really doing what I think that they should be doing. How do I make sure that it does that? How do I get these grapes off of these vines that I have? And what do I do with it? And there's some common themes. There's a lot of common themes to what it turns out to be for some of these vines. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then kind of just some of the best practices that we can use going forward. But for what kind of muscadine is this? The hard question is it's hard to tell. Even if you stare at muscadines all the time, there's a lot of similarities, there's a lot of differences that you can sometimes narrow it down a lot, but they grow differently in different places. So the only way you can really tell is through genetic testing, which is, much further along than people want to go for. We can narrow it down, and we're going to talk about how we could potentially narrow it down in the future. But genetic testing is the only way to know for sure. And then why is my vine not producing fruit? Most of the time that is going to come down to a pruning issue, or perhaps drainage or sunlight if it's not getting enough drainage or sunlight to those vines. Is there some disease coming up? And then also we do have, not all, but some of our muscadines are either male or female. And if you have a female plant that doesn't have a pollinator nearby, you're not going to get any fruit. If you only have a male plant, you're not going to get any fruit. And so kind of learning what those would be is something to keep in mind going forward. And if you have other questions, you can also stick them in the chat and we can try to address those as we go through it as well. But what is a muscadine? So not everyone knows what a muscadine is. I do sometimes like it, especially if we're in a group, to get a show of hands on who has had muscadines before. But if you weren't familiar, so we generally talk about our muscadines and our bunch grapes. They're very similar. They're all belonging to the genus generally Vitis. So viticulturist is what my title is. Comes from the genus Vitis, is where that name comes from. And most of the time when we are thinking about our muscadines, we are thinking about, yeah, we can see the slide here. The species Vitis rotundifolia. There are a couple other species that can come through here, but most of the time it's going to be Vitis rotundifolia is the primary species of muscadines. For Vitis, these are our bunch grapes. This is a subgenera of grapes that kind of get clumped into the rest of the grapes that we're produced across the country. So Vitis vinifera is the most commonly commercially produced species. It's going to make your Chardonnays, your Cabernet Sauvignons, your wine grapes. It'll also make up your Thompson seedless, your Autumn King, which are your table grapes. Those are the ones you're going to find in the grocery store most of the time. Concord grapes are another species, a different species. So that is an American bunch grape. But those are all going to be slightly different. And we kind of classify them based on the number of chromosomes that they have. So if you're trying to breed a muscadine and a bunch grape, that doesn't always work very well because it's kind of like breeding a horse and a donkey. If you get a mule, sometimes they're sterile. You don't get any fruit from that. So that's one of the tricky things of working between the two and kind of why we separate them. But muscadines are native to the southeast. So here we have just a map looking at the native range for the Vitis rotundifolia. Georgia is the leading muscadine producer in the world. And we have probably about 3,000 acres, commercial acres of muscadines across the Carolinas, Georgia, Florida, that make up the commercial production of muscadines. But of course, we have a lot of people that have muscadines in their backyards. They're going to have a vine or two down the road, and you're also going to see a lot in the woods because it's a native grape that we see throughout. And while we do normally talk about how we have muscadines in as wild grapes, or we have muscadines, we do sometimes have some wild American species of grapes. So while you can't necessarily tell what kind of muscadine it is, what kind of bunch grape it is, you can generally pretty easily tell between the two if you're like, ooh, I'm not sure if this is even a muscadine. So one of the ways that you can look for that is to look whether your muscadines tend to have much smoother bark, where you have a lot more stuff sloughing off of bunch grapes. You're more likely to have a more serrated leaf in a muscadine, although you can sometimes see that in some American species, so it's not necessarily a great indicator. It's just one of the potential indicators. And then we also tend to have much smaller clusters with hopefully larger berries. At least the commercial varieties tend to have much larger berries than our bunch grapes, but they're going to be much smaller clusters for that versus a bunch grape, which tend to have these big, beautiful clusters with fairly small fruit on it. But one of the ways that you can tell it much more clearly tends to be by the tendrils. So there's a vine, so they're used to climbing up different structures. Our bunch grapes are going to have a forked tendril. So if you see them growing up, you're going to have two different legs sticking off of your tendril. Versus in a muscadine, you're going to have just a single tendril, is one of the clear ways that you can tell a difference between that. So while you may not be able to tell exactly what kind of muscadine or exactly what kind of bunch grape it is, if you can at least tell the difference between the two, if you see that. Another question that I get is, or I'll be talking to people about muscadines, and they're like, "Oh, well, I prefer scuppernongs, or the scuppernongs are my favorite." Which scuppernong are fine, they're good. That's actually just a type, a cultivar, a variety of muscadine. So a scuppernong is a muscadine, but a muscadine is not necessarily a scuppernong. And scuppernongs are generally, it's just the first cultivated. Muscadine that we have. So it was pulled off of the riverbanks of the Scuppernong River in North Carolina. It's planted in Roanoke. And then it kind of grew from there. So it makes up the background of a lot of the different commercial groups that we have. But for the most part, we don't really see actually this variety in production because we have other bronze varieties that tend to be a lot more productive and have better flavor. So a lot of times, even when you have someone, they're like, oh, here's a Scuppernong grape, it's generally not actually a Scuppernong grape because there tends to be some better ones for that. But they are still, you can get bronze, you can get black fruited muscadines, you can get red fruited ones that will all be kind of different colors. And they're all good, even if you can get a lot of different flavors coming from that. The mother vine is a scuppernong. So if you were to go into Roanoke County in the North Carolina Outer Banks, you can see one of these big old muscadines. Um, they say that this was first put in place by those people that originally cultivated that and really isolated the scuppernong grape. It's probably not as old as the Roanoke colony of North Carolina. It's probably was planted much later than that, but obviously it's still a very old vine. And this one vine covers about a quarter of an acre of space over in the Roanoke area. So you can still see them growing around originally. But when we're looking at our different cultivars, when we're choosing what kind of cultivars that we want, one thing to keep in mind is going to be your cold hardiness. Compared to our bunch grapes, we have a lot less cold hardiness present in muscadines. And that can show itself in a different way than you often see in bunch grapes. A lot of times when we have damage, cold damage to bunch grapes, you'll just see the bud die. And so while you're going to interfere with your production for that year, maybe the following year, you'll still recover just fine. A lot of times when we have cold damage happen in muscadines, it affects how the branches themselves, how the vine, the woody structure itself grows, and it can kind of damage that. And so it can be a little bit harder to sometimes recover from cold damage. It's generally not a concern for most of Georgia. In Gwinnett County and around Gwinnett County, it's generally not much of a concern. Albeit we definitely have seen some issues around that area, around the Athens area after the cold snap around Christmas 22. If y'all remember how cold it got over there, that it's definitely seen some damage that has come from that. But it's generally not as much of a concern as in some other areas. So if you're worried about your backyard grapes over in Gwinnett, it's probably okay for the most part, except some of those freak incidents that happen. One of the signs of cold damage, or it can be other physiological stressors, are these aerial roots that can pop off. So if you see a lot of aerial roots from your vines, that's kind of what these little structures are coming off of here, off of this cordon. That is a sign of stress. So you might want to investigate a little further to see exactly what that might be, and kind of move forward if you want to like maybe renew a cordon or something based on exactly how bad it is. This is from a cold incident that we can kind of trace back to a particular instance. This is Carlos is the cultivar here, and I have on the next slide an image of kind of what this field looked like. Vines, young vines, and also vines that have been overcropped or overstressed in a couple other areas are going to be much more likely to have cold damage than something that is growing much more healthily. And so just something to keep in mind that if you've had vines that have been struggling for a while, you get a really cold snap, you're more likely to get damage from cold in those scenarios. So this is kind of what that picture I was talking about. We talked about had that cold stress incident. This is in Arkansas, actually. That the Carlos that I just showed, where we did see some aerial roots, we saw some damage, is all of these. That from afar, that side looked great. Carlos is one of the most widely produced cultivars. It's often called a scuppernong because it tends to be a medium berry. It's often used for wine production. It is one of the most popular wine production. It's a bronze fruited grape. But over here on this side is of the same age, they were planted at the same time, and this one is noble, which is a black fruited processing grape. So while we tend to think of Carlos being a little bit more cold sensitive than noble sometimes, it perhaps is not. In the dead of winter, it's just more susceptible to the spring frost because it will break bud a little bit earlier than that. And you'll see a lot of variety even within the different cultivar species. Okay, so we won't go too much more into the cultivars that you can find. You'll be able to find a lot more information on different cultivars if you're thinking of ones you want to produce, or if you're trying to narrow down what you might have in your backyard. If you go onto the Muscadine Grape Breeding website, if you can select either juice cultivars or fresh market cultivars, and go and they'll have more information on kind of what growth habits we expect from different muscadines, what kind of characteristics we see from that, and you can either narrow it down further or you can make your decision of what you would like to produce if you're trying to figure out something to plant. This is information from Georgia. It does base most of its information off of some fields around Tifton, Georgia, which will be slightly different, but also fairly similar to what you would expect over in Gwinnett as well. Okay, so there's some different cultural practices that we want to do if we want to make sure that we're keeping our healthy vines over a long period of time. First, I want to plug this one poster. It's just kind of a visual reminder of some of the things that you should be doing throughout the season as we go forward, as well as potential diseases and pests that you might encounter and when in the season they're going to be more of an issue for your muscadine grapes. So here we just have the different phenological periods. So we started dormant, we moved to bud break, early pre-bloom, fruit set, harvest, that kind of stages, and then kind of what all you need to be doing during that time period. So obviously during dormancy, you want to be doing your dormant pruning. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but you're also going to be keeping an eye out for different signs of stress and other issues. We're going to be making sure that we're going to be maintaining some good floor management. You can deal with a lot of different plants around your muscadines, but especially if it's stressed, especially if it's young, you want to make sure that you're going to keep a pretty clean floor. Tissue sampling, whether you have any nutrient issues that might come about. Hedging, making sure you're not dragging your vines across the ground, which is also going to be problematic to those vines and living well. And then when you finally get out to harvest, and keeping an eye out for other issues as we go. And then different diseases and pests as we go through here. So where to plant your vines. One thing, these are going to be very full sun crops. So you want to make sure that you are getting full sun to your vines. The less sun you're going to have, the more potential disease issues you might have, and also the less fruit. The slower growing your vines are going to be. If it's in full shade, you tend to get very, very little to no fruit at all. If they are in full sun, you have very few issues with sunburn happening for these plants. But the most important thing is also making sure that you have good soil drainage. Your grapevines do not like wet feet. They will not tolerate wet feet. And the fastest way to kill your vines is to put them in a pool of water and have those roots rot out from under them. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Other soil management, other planting prep that you should be doing. It's hard to adjust your soil once you have the vines in the ground. But kind of keeping an eye out for what your soil pH is. If you've just pulled up some pine trees and you've planted the vines directly into the soil, that might be a little bit more acidic than those vines like. We do have a little bit more acidity tolerance in muscadines than we will in other bunch grapes. But we like to be in a 6 to 6.5 range, which tends to be a bit more basic than a lot of places that we find here in Georgia. So being able to adjust your soil pH prior to planting will be helpful, and then just something that you might occasionally want to monitor going forward. Doesn't need to happen every year, can happen every several years if you want to just kind of keep an eye on what the soil is doing around your vines. And parts of the vine, so just so when I keep talking about different parts of the vine as we move through here, we all are on the same page. One, we have a high wire trellis. This is the most common and probably the easiest way to train your vines, but you can train them in different ways and you can still have a lot of the same structures that are going forward. But your trunk tends to be pretty easy for folks to identify. Is going to be your main permanent vine structure that's going from the ground up to the top of your trellis. Suckers are going to be pieces of shoots that are going to be growing from out of the trunk. You can use these sometimes to retrain different parts of the vine if you need to retrain your vine. So if you're doing a lot of rehab, you may want to leave some of your suckers growing. But for the most part, if everything else is growing as normal, you want to get rid of the suckers as soon as you find them, so that one, you can keep everything growing, keep the resources of the vine growing to where the fruit is going to be coming from. Your cordons or your arms are going to be grow from the trunk. This is also permanent vine structure. They're growing from the trunk, and they're going to be what's horizontally laying out on your trellis system. So I'm going to generally say cordons, but it's like your little arms of your grapevines. So this is also permanent vine structure. that it has grown out, and this is going to be what you're going to continue to grow the your spurs on, which are going to be what produces your fruit each and every year. So every single time you are going to be pruning your vines, you're going to be leaving your cordons, but you're going to be cutting off a lot of your shoots or your canes. So when they first emerge from the buds in the spring, they're shoots, and throughout the season, they're going to continue to grow. And as we get into fall, they're going to start to harden off, they're going to start to lignify, and then they become canes. So essentially, it's just a cane is an older shoot as we go through here. Okay, so again, your trellis system, the most common, the easiest way to grow them tends to be on a high wire trellis. It's also the least expensive because it requires the fewest materials, where you just need a post in the ground, a sturdy post, because a lot of times these vines can get very large. Will be helpful. So if you've planted on a T-post or something that's a little bit more flimsy, you just might have to replace that more often than something that has a little bit more sturdiness on it. And then a wire that's going to go along the tops of the vines. You generally want to make this as tall as you can comfortably work with. So if you are 5 foot tall, you probably don't want to have a 5 foot trellis because it's going to be hard to get to the top of them, but you don't necessarily want to go too much farther than that. If you are 6.5 feet tall, you can absolutely raise up the height of the trellis if you're the one that's going to be working with them for that. So the height of your vines is flexible. Just you want to make sure that you can get airflow underneath the vines. You don't want it to be too close to the ground. You don't want it to be dragging on the ground. But you also need it to be comfortable enough to work with. Between the vines, so each vine is going to need, we're going to be talking about it in horizontal space because it's growing along a wire. You want to give it 12 to 20 feet of space in between different vines if you're planting multiple, or if you're planting just putting in enough trellis that you're going to be working with. That I'm going to plant right along my post so that I can get my trunk, the support of that post is going to go through, and then I'm going to run my cordons along the trellis wire for 12 to 20 feet. More easily if you can grow them in both directions, so you have a cordon going in each direction rather than just in one direction. Can be easier than trying to do it just in one direction. It can also make it a little bit easier if you have to retrain something. Or if you have damage, it's a faster process to retrain if you can have 2 different directions going. One thing to keep in mind, one of the easiest ways to help make sure that your vine is growing along your trellis properly is to wrap your shoots around, to wrap your cordons around the wire, which can be fine at first, but you do want to unwrap it shortly after. You can use different ways to tie it that can hopefully not girdle the plant, because if you leave it wrapped around the wire as it continues to age, it's going to be much harder to get it unwrapped, and then it's going to just girdle itself as that cordon begins to grow. You're just going to have to replace it more often. Is one thing to keep in mind. So ideally, you're going to be growing this in 2 directions for 6 to 10 feet along the wire. Choosing how much space to give your vines is going to depend on the cultivar that you're choosing, and a lot of times what kind of ground you're planting your vines into. So if we are choosing this is a Carlos muscadine. If you are planting something that is known for being very vigorous, a high vigor muscadine, if you are on the breeding website, as you go through the table, it'll tell you kind of high vigor, medium vigor, that kind of scenario. There we go. That you want to give this more space. So we did a spacing trial at the horticulture research farm just outside of Athens, which is where I'm located. The Carlos vines did the best when they were given 20 feet. You really didn't get any sort of benefit on fruit quality, or it was also just very, very dense. It was harder to work with if it was on a tighter spacing than that. Versus pulp, which is one of the table grape fresh market production muscadines. This is going to be a much larger fruit than the Carlos, and it's going to be a little bit more of a medium vigor vine. So these did better at the little bit tighter spacing. So I would probably, if I were to go plant these in my backyard, I would give the Carlos I would put a post in. I would grow the Carlos up the wire and give it 10 feet in both directions. I would put the Carlos or the Polk in and grow it in 6 feet in both directions, or 7.5 feet in both directions. It's what I would do for those vines. One other thing that we tested while we were in this is kind of the espalier, the different vertical division tree trellis system. I mentioned this to y'all because it was one on a commercial side, not worth it. You got no real increase in the fruit produced, even if you had double the amount of cordon. If you had double the amount of buds, you really didn't get a lot more fruit from those, but it just doubled the labor that was involved. However, if you were trying to grow muscadines just in your backyard to make it look pretty, you can potentially grow it like this if you want to do it for fun. It does, obviously increase the labor. It doesn't necessarily give you more or better fruit, but it does look pretty if you wanted to make a fence of muscadine. So it is um, a fun potential for a backyard grower for those muscadines. But yeah, so that's just kind of going into if you have a vigorous vine, if a high vigor vine, give it more space. A medium vigor vine, obviously give it less space. There are many other trellis systems that you can potentially use for those muscadines that are a little bit more intensive, which can be depending on the amount of space that you have, or depending on if you want something that looks different. Anything that you are growing a muscadine on, you probably should be growing it so it's can the canopy can grow down. Because if you have something that like a vertical shoot position system that you see in a lot of other vineyards, if it's something that has wants the shoots to grow up, you're going to be fighting with it a lot. You're going to have a lot of different work to keep it, make sure that it's growing upward throughout the season. It's probably not worth it. If you have it growing downward, the clusters are small enough that you're not going to break the shoots, so you don't have to worry about the support. And it's much easier to grow like this. You'll have a lot less constant labor to do for this sort of system. A Geneva double curtain is also a common trellis used for these, especially if you have a little bit less space to work with. You can, again, do it growing in one direction, or you can have it growing in the other direction. So you have 4 cordons growing in both. And then you just kind of space it horizontally so that you have space in the middle of those vines to give it a little bit more airflow. So it requires a slightly more intensive trellis system, but also can be is a popular, especially backyard method for growing this. You can also grow it on a pergola. So this is also a common backyard preference, that if you want something to grow onto a pergola, that works just great. It's a little bit harder to work with, so this is not a good commercial option, but it's just fine for a backyard option. That you can absolutely grow it on this. The style of that works. Based on, I would plant it kind of along the post and let it grow out. And then you probably need a ladder in order to prune it going forward. Because you do need to prune it in order to get some quality fruit coming from it. You can prune it in different ways. It makes it a little bit more complicated if it's on a pergola. But this is also a fun backyard option that you can absolutely grow. One thing that I do want to like, muscadines are very hardy plants. They grow great in the southeast, especially once they're established. They can be largely ignored throughout the season, but the baby vines are going to be the most sensitive for this. They're going to be Your muscadines are also going to be a little bit more pest resistant. So if you have a lot of deer, if you have a lot of birds in your area, you're going to be fighting them off a lot less than a lot of your other grapes that you might put in the ground. But you still do want to make sure that you're protecting your baby vines. A lot of times we're using these grow tubes in order to help make sure that you're protecting the baby vine. You do want to keep an eye out. Japanese beetles, June bugs often come out in the season, and they can feast on your leaves, and especially for those young vines, if they eat too much of it, you can cause issues going forward. So keeping an eye on the baby vines and kind of letting them to baby them a little bit more than you might the adults as they go. So training, once you put them in the ground, you are going to be slowly train them into the trellis system that you have chosen. A lot of times you can somewhat ignore it and just do it during your winter pruning stuff. When we go into part two in December, when we are actively pruning, we're going to be able to do this training, active training. And it's okay if you leave everything until you get into the winter pruning, but you can also work at it in the summer. So this would be, if you have backyard vines, this is about the latest you want to do it. So if you're trying to do your summer pruning, summer training, I'd go run out right after this talk and go do that now. Otherwise, if it's going to take you a couple weeks to get to it, just let everything go into dormancy so you can get all of the nutrients from the leaves back into your shoots, and then just worry about it during permanency. So if you haven't done anything to your vines, either do it like this afternoon or just wait until dormancy in order to work with it. But that's fine. But essentially, you may get lots of different shoots coming out of lots of different buds along your trellis system, along your root system, and they kind of bush up if you've been ignoring them, and that's fine. Once you get something that looks healthy, that looks at least a pencil thick, you're going to be training that up. You can use a string or you can use a bamboo shoot. Just kind of train it up to your training wire. And then you'll pinch it off, and so you get two different shoots coming out of the horizontal buds, and you'll train that out into your trellis system. So those will become your cordons of the future. A lot of times muscadines can do this during the first year. If it isn't doing this, then that's fine. You trim everything back to two buds and start again. If you type in UGA viticulture, I very recently put out a post that kind of went a lot more into vine training. If you want more information on that, but it's harder to do this without a hands-on technique. So we'll have some more pictures that are going forward but at this point, I'm not going to spend too much time on it because it's getting too late to work on this during the summer season. So just as we go through. Again, if you have a baby vine that just has not yet reached the wire that you're trying to grow it to during one season, that's when I would start again. So I would, if it does not reach up to the top wire, I would go ahead and cut everything down to just one shoot the following season, or maybe even just cut it back to two buds to start with, and then you can grow brand new shoots from the new buds the following season. They'll grow back out, and you'll have a lot of growth that following season. You should be able to get it all the way out into your trellis system. If you have not fully filled out your trellis system, you should also not be letting your vines put out any fruit. So if you have a tiny little vine that wants to put out a lot of flowers, wants to put out little clusters, I would just pinch those off and let your vine put a lot more of its resources toward becoming a future vine, so that you can have a good, strong foundation to go into the future. So it can be a test of patience sometimes, but it can also help you keep a much healthier long-term vine if you keep all the fruit off until you actually fully reach out to your trellis system. A lot of times, if it's also not growing as happily as you think it should be, especially if you get to season two and it's not growing out onto your trellis, still haven't reached your wire by the end of the season, you should readdress how your fertilization is going. The smaller, like again, you don't want to put too much fertilization out at once because it can cause some issues of overfertilization, and also can only absorb so much of the vines. So at least two different fertilization applications. Again, it's too late for that. You do not want to be putting any nitrogen onto your vines in the fall, but you can plan again for next season, that putting out some nutrients. If you can do it at least twice, and then more times you can spread it out between bud break and mid-July, probably in Gwinnett, late July, and at the latest over in Gwinnett County. You can spread it out to as many times or as many applications as you want when just small amounts will help the vines absorb those nutrients more effectively than just a few large volumes. The easiest way to do this is to do it based on how your soil type, how your vines are growing. So if you haven't done a soil test, you can reach out to Lisa and the rest of the extension office over in Gwinnett County. They can help you with those soil tests. They can also help you with tissue tests if you have vines that are already established. Being able to look at the nutrients that are in it's in the grapevine tissue can help adjust that to the plant. Because looking at the tissue test versus looking at a soil test is kind of like looking at your personal blood test versus looking at the box of cereal. that you eat every morning for whatever your nutrient facts are. Like I may be getting all of the iron out of my Cheerios, or I might not. So whatever is in my blood is going to be how well I am absorbing the stuff that I'm consuming. So if you can't, like soil tests can be a little bit cheaper, and are great for making sure that you're looking at your soil pH, and can kind of give you an idea of what you might be wanting to do. But if you can look at those tissue tests, and especially if you're concerned about your nutrients, will make a bigger difference for that. The larger the vine is, the more nutrients that you want to give it, and the more spread out that you want to do it. So those baby vines, the root system is small, so you want to give it a pretty tight diameter around your vine, no more than a foot. But once you have a much more established vine, you can do a 6 foot diameter around your vines. Especially the more rainfall that we get, and the longer established, the larger that root system is going to become. So the larger the vine is, the larger your root system is. And so making sure that you kind of spread it out will help those vines absorb the nutrients a lot more effectively for that. Again, checking your soil acidity every 3 years through those soil tests, 3, 4, 5 years is fine in a backyard scenario. And dolomitic lime can be a great option for helping to re-raise your pH, and generally add some magnesium back in, because we also tend to have pretty low magnesium in our soils as well. Again, I mentioned those tissue tests. We tend to either prefer, if we can, to take our tissues around bloom. So this is around bloom for muscadines, or around veraison, which is the time period where your grapevine is switching from berry growth to berry ripening. So if you have a purple cultivar, that's when you're going to start seeing color in those fruit, versus in the unripened that's still growing for this. So choosing leaves that are across from clusters tends to be the easiest way to do that. So I would choose this for your tissue test, is where I would be collecting that. We do have a new also extension publication about going into a lot more depth on tissue testing in particular. So if you have any questions about that, Lisa can also post the extension publication, which has a procedure and a protocol for how to do that exactly, as well as for or for soil tests. Okay, pruning. Once again, this is a required practice. You should be doing your pruning every single year. Your fruit is coming off of new wood, so anything that's been growing, a bud that's going to pop out is going to have your fruit for the following year. And so you're going to be choosing how many buds that you want to retain from your grapevine, based on how vigorous your vine is growing. If you had to prune, or if you had to hedge the vines a lot to keep them off the ground, like more than 2 times a season, you probably want to leave more buds on your vine. If you never had to hedge it at all, it never touched the ground, you might want to use fewer buds on that. Higher vigor cultivars, I keep switching, I keep hitting the wrong button. Higher vigor cultivars like Carlos are ones that you want to tend to leave more buds. So this is looking at like a 30 to 35 buds per linear foot of cordon, versus a lower vigor vine like Supreme, which is a popular table fresh market muscadine. You want to be leaving a lot fewer than that, because if you retain more buds than that, you tend to have a lot more risk of overcropping those vines and putting at more risk for other stressors that are going to pop out. February-ish tends to be a great time to prune. You want to make sure that you are pruning before bud break in the spring. And while you can start pruning, if you're like, ooh, the only time that I potentially can do this is in December, great, do it in December. If you have time to do it in February, great. The later you can delay it prior to bud break, the more protection those vines get. You can be a little bit more protection from different cold damage, from different pests, but making sure that you do it every year is much more important. Also, I'll say, if you're like, ooh, I'm not sure about how well pruning is going to go, like I don't know how to do it, I'm confused. One, we're here to help, extension is here to help you, but also even bad pruning tends to be better than not pruning it at all. So even coming through and doing a not great job tends to be better than not doing it at all. But we have our different, like this is kind of what it'll look like. This one has been hedged So we did make it so it was a little bit easier to maintain. But this is kind of what it looks like prior to pruning. And then we're going to come through here and leave these spurs. So we want to leave 1 to 3 buds per spur. So you'll see kind of like little spots that jut out, which are our nodes, which is the buds that'll become a shoot the following season. And you would kind of want to just leave a handful on each spur. Again, count those buds if you can. Leave 1 to 3 buds per, and then you'll just count those spurs. You'll count the buds on the spurs. If you always leave 2, it makes it easier to just count the spurs. And then you can kind of get an idea of what the number of buds that you've left per foot of cordon. But just pruning it back, even if you don't count it, can do a lot better job. And if you just kind of get an idea of how your vines have been doing and leaving more or less, you'll get better at it, and you'll have to count less the more you do it. But being able to count at least those first couple times so you can kind of get an idea of how well it's doing will be helpful. Again, the fruit comes off the new wood. This should be done every year. And again, if you don't do it well, it's okay. It tends to be better than just not doing it at all. A lot of times we have to do a lot of rehab if you've not been hanging out with those vines for very long. If it's been ignored for a couple years, if it's been maybe growing on a different thing, it hasn't been trained at all, then there tends to be a lot of rehab that can come forward. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a hot second. But that's okay, and we can do with that, and it might delay how your fruit comes out the following year, but these vines are pretty hardy. That just we tend to The biggest issue that I tend to see is people not being aggressive enough with their pruning for that. It's okay to be pretty hard on how you're pruning these vines. And the worst thing you can do is just maybe cut off all of the buds, in which case you have to wait another year before you're going to get any fruit off of that. And hopefully it'll still survive, should be fine. A couple of different issues that you can see with your trunk, if you do pop up, is Botryopsida dieback, which is a trunk disease issue. So if you are seeing a lot of dieback happening on your, it tends to happen in like one side of the vine or the other, and you make a big cut and you see this kind of like pie shape of darker wood in your cordon, that can be an indication of trunk disease. You can cure trunk disease just by cutting it out. And if you have a vine that has a lot of trunk disease issues, you can cut it all the way back until you no longer see the pie shape. And then you want to give yourself another couple inches of trunk that's clean, because sometimes it takes a little bit for that pie shape to show up and that fungus is still spreading. So you continue to cut back. And you can sometimes get a paint sealant, like a VitaSeal is a product that you can sometimes use. There are a couple different fungicides that you can also potentially use to help seal those wounds for the pruning wounds, if you want to be particularly cautious. But you can just continue to cut back until you get rid of the diseased tissue, take that diseased tissue, get it out of the vineyard, and hopefully not have those issues going forward in the future. Crown gall is also a big problem that we can sometimes see. This tends to be more common in very young vines. And this often comes around, like we'll say weed whacker blight, because it is a bacteria that tends to be present on the vines. It oftentimes comes in from the nursery, which because there's very few things that we can do properly to help control it in the nursery at this time at least. So it can sometimes come in, and if you do see these crown galls, it tends to happen right kind of near the base of the plant, near the soil line. And it tends to happen when you have some sort of injury occur. It can be cold injury. It can be weed whacker blight. If you've hit the vine, the base of the vine with the weed whacker, cause some injury to that, you can get this bacteria, which will just kind of hijack the growth system of your grapevine. There's really not much you can do to cure it once it shows up. You can cut it back, but a lot of times it's so close to the ground that it doesn't make it very helpful. That hopefully, if your crown gall does not girdle your vine, you can sometimes grow out and live past it. And so a lot of times, once you see a lot of issues with this, there's not a lot you can do. You just kind of have to hopefully wait it out, and your vine can survive past it. Pruning notes. They're also one of the things that I see in areas that are maybe they don't know as much about pruning, is that they'll leave multiple arms, multiple cordons growing along the wire, you just want to leave one. So there's just this one cordon on this young vine. And if there's multiple growing on there, I've just cut back. Unless you're trying to renew the cordon, you're trying to make a new shoot grow along that. A lot of times you can get very, very vigorous shoots in the season that might pop off of this spur and grow along the wire. And just if we get to the new season, we want to just make sure that we cut that back so that we can still grow just one cordon per wire. That'll help make sure that you get plenty of airflow, concentrate your growth in to where it can come on properly. Cordon renewals. So again, aggressive pruning can be fine. We can have vines that like this has been vaguely properly pruned for years and years and years. And you can see these antlers is what we call this. If you've just continued to build on every single cut so that you have just these towers. One that can make it a little bit trickier for making sure you get airflow. That can also make it a little bit trickier for keeping your fruit in a place that you know where to look for it. Because that canopy can be pretty dense. But when it gets to this point, this is where I'd be like, okay, so we need to do a cordon renewal for this. And aggressive pruning can be fine. So I might come in here and make a big cut there and a big cut there so that I have some spurs still below it. And I'm going to regrow. The spurs are going to shoot some new shoots out the following season. And I can grow the shoot out and that won't necessarily produce a lot of fruit that season that you're growing it. It'll be a brand new cordon and you continue growing from there. Sometimes an aggressive pruning can be fine, but that can also be a pretty scary cut to make. That if you're like, ooh, I don't know if I can quite take that leap of faith on these vines, I want to be a little bit less aggressive. You can do it at a step at a time. So if you have your vines growing in both directions, I would make that big aggressive cut on one side, make sure that I have spurs that I can renew a cane out to become your future cordon for that following season. And then I would just aggressively cut back some of these antlers where I still have plenty of spurs along those vines, but that can begin that renewal process. So in this case, if you were like, oh, I don't want to make quite that heavy a leap, you can just kind of cut back one side a little bit. You'll still get a lot more fruit off of that one side that following season. And then you can come in the following year once you have your renewed cordon on the other side, make that big cut the next year, and then you'll do both sides. You'll just do it over a longer period of time. That can be fine. That can sometimes feel a little bit better for if you have just the one vine in your backyard that you don't want to be too aggressive on pruning. That can be fine. You can do that just fine, and that'll be all right. Other tasks. Hedging, again, you want to make sure that the vines stay off of the ground. Helping to make sure that you get airflow underneath the vine can help with disease pressure. And then also just if you have a bunch of vines growing in there and you run a four-wheeler, or many of y'all may not have a tractor that you're running through, but getting your vines cut up in your wheels is not great, and that can be a way that you can pull the vine over or cause other issues. So just kind of keeping them off the ground helps with the people working around their safety, as well as helping keep the vine a little bit more practiced. Floor management can be much more able to do a lot of different things for muscadines versus bunch grapes. For this, the biggest thing is you want to make sure that you aren't damaging the trunk, the base of your trunk with the mower, with your weed whacker. You want to make sure that you can have a little bit of a buffer so you're not just smacking the heck out of your vines and giving yourself some crown gall issues. If you have a very young or very stressed vine, kind of reducing the competition to those vines can be very important. Otherwise, you can keep grass on either side. That can be okay. It's more traditional to have a more bare ground directly underneath the vines, but a lot of time people don't want to do that. You can put a little bit of mulch there, as long as everything is draining properly. That can help make sure that you don't hit it with the weed whacker, that kind of scenario. There are a number of pests and diseases that can hit your muscadines. If you don't want to be spraying fungicides or pesticides on your grapes, that can be fine. Most of the time, our muscadines can grow without putting any fungicides on it, as long as you're willing to lose some and you're willing to do some cultural practice to make sure that you're reducing the pressure as much as possible. There are some other organic products you can also use, but a lot of times we don't necessarily have as much of the recommendations, or we don't have as much information on a lot of those products for this, because at least in the commercial side, um, there's was where most of that conventional research has been going forward in the future. But we do have a yearly updated IPM guide. This is the 2025 Southeast Regional Muscadine Grape guide that gets updated with different products that can affect different diseases, and what all you might use. So this will give you product options. This will give you timing options for that and other practices that keep going over the year. And again, this gets updated by a group of scientists. So we talk about this every year and go over it. I need to finish updating the bunch grape guide for this section as well. And there's a Southeast bunch grape guide as well. So be going through that. But that will have a lot more information on the pests and diseases and the products that you might use to control that for this. The most common issues that we see for muscadines that tend to cause issues are different fruit rots. They kind of get just lumped together into fruit rot grouping. There's a bunch of them. A lot of times they look similar, or they can show up in a similar way, and they're treated similarly. So that's why we kind of group them together as fruit rots. Bright rot, black rot, bitter rot are all. Black rot tends to be the biggest issue. Again, you're going to get a lot more natural resistance in our muscadines. So I've never seen it as bad as this, except in this one field for black rot in muscadines, but it can happen. Again, the other fruit rots, this one's just a foliar rot for that. They tend to not be as bad of a problem, and especially if you only have a vine or two, it tends not to be a concern, as long as you're willing to lose a few grapes and get rid of this disease stuff and get it out of your space so you can reduce some of the inoculum. It tends to be okay. I'm in a backyard scenario, because once you also see these diseases pop up, you really can't do too much about them, because it all has to be pretty preventative for this. So if you see a lot of issues one season, I would just probably have to come in the following season and put in some more applications of some pesticide in order to kind of control this. But again, if you have some issues with this, you can look at the IPM guide and you can talk over to the extension agent about this as well. We also see some issues that are less common. One of the more recent reports that we got over the last few years is some different phytotox, just a stress response on the leaves that look kind of like a sunburn response to some different products. That's more of a thing that I can talk to Lisa about later on. But if you see any of those issues for that, you can kind of let us know. Again, Japanese beetles, June bugs, they're not as big of a problem for matured vines or for your muscadines, but can sometimes eat a lot of the fruit and a lot of the leaves. And especially if you have young vines, you may want to try to control them a little bit more aggressively than others. The most insidious and the harder one to deal with, again, not as big a problem if you don't have just a ton of vines in a single area, but are these grapefruit borer. This is what the adult looks like, so it can kind of look kind of scary if you see it out in the field. They're not aggressive. They are also not, they don't have a stinger. They cannot hurt you, but they do look kind of like something that could hurt you, but they're not aggressive. But if you do see these, they'll lay eggs, they'll put these grubs in your root system, which can just cause a lot of potential issues in the root system that can eventually kill the vines going up. So if you happen to see a lot of these casings, they'll start to emerge probably in early July through like September will be kind of the last time that you might see them, probably in Gwinnett County. They'll peak kind of in August. Is if you see these casings laying around the base of your trunk, that's an indication that you do have some present. And if you do have some present, you may want to consider some options. There's lots of different options that you can do, but it will tend to not get a lot better. So if you see them, there's pheromone traps. You can use some different nematodes, some entomopathic nematodes that you can apply on the soil that can also be pretty effective. Um, but that can be an option that will kill the vine over time, or kill the vineyard over time. You can also, especially in a homeowner scenario, um, once you start getting into the time where the babies are gonna be emerging in July, you can mound up a lot of soil around the base of the trunk. This is like, I mean, labor intensive because you also have to make sure that you unpack the soil, that you take it all down in November, so that you don't get a lot of roots coming out of the top. You can get some rot issues, but it can keep the adult or the fresh adults from emerging and getting anywhere. And so you can kind of stop the issue that way. So that's a more practical option for a homeowner scenario. Other things that you can potentially see, leaf miner is just kind of cool to see it. Like you don't see it in the berries very often, but you have a little bit thicker skin in muscadines. This is not an issue, like not something I'm concerned about. Like I wouldn't necessarily want to eat this, but you'll see similar damage on the leaves or on the fruit. And I've never seen this be bad enough to warrant control. So it's just kind of a fun thing to spot in the vineyard. And again, there's more resources that are going to come out, and they're going to have more options for stuff that's emerging. Obviously, you are familiar with the Extension Office in Gwinnett County, because this is where we are right now on this webinar. But if you're interested in more grape information, you can also come to the UGA Extension Viticulture blog, where we put different information that's about different pests. It's focused on not just muscadines, it's also a bunch of grapes. But that'll be a lot of more information on there as well. You can sign up for the newsletter as well. That's on there. That comes no more than once a day and normally not more than a couple times a month. Other resources that you can comp, these are the different things that I've pulled some information from for this presentation. But if you have more questions or stuff that you just kind of want to look over some more information, that will be as part of that as well. But with that, I can answer any questions if folks have them, which I'm fine with people unmuting if they have that, or if there's stuff in the chat as
There's some
well.
stuff in the chat. There's a couple in there.
Perfect. Let's see here. Okay. So is it true that muscadines usually only fruit on the first two cordons from Beth? So they are only going to fruit from the buds that have come out that next year. And the more cordons that you have, the more like dispersed a lot of those resources get, the less fruit you're going to get on anything. And most of the time when we are training these vines and the way that we're training them is in order to help maximize the fruit that we get, while also kind of making sure that we are balancing the vegetative and the reproductive growth for that. So if you don't prune it one year, you're going to get fruit that's happening all over the place, and that can sometimes be okay to come back and go through that later. But the more times you do that, the less fruit's going to happen from anywhere. So we train these vines in this particular way. You don't necessarily have to do it like you can do multiple cordons. It doesn't have to just be the two. But if you don't get it from the spurs from that fresh wood, you're not going to get any fruit coming from it. Hopefully that is a useful. Any issues with hardwood chips to mulch? Generally not issues with hardwood chips for mulching grapevines. Using pine needles can be a little bit more tricky depending on the pH, because it can sometimes those tend to be a lower pH. But hardwood chips tend to be fine. And as long as you're making sure that you get sufficient drainage. We don't generally need to irrigate our muscadines very often, especially after they have established. But a lot of times there can be a lot of moisture that's just depends on exactly how you mulch it. If you have a lot of organic matter in your soil, that can sometimes also retain a lot more moisture. And so just kind of keeping an eye on how much moisture those vines are getting, letting them dry out if you can, between rains. Depends on if you're actively watering or if you're not. If it's already established, you probably don't need to water it at all, at least in Gwinnett County. Great. Awesome. Well, while it's always fun to talk about muscadines on the screen, it's even more fun to get out there with the vines themselves and talk about it while we're at it. So, if you're able to join for part two, great. I'll look forward to seeing you there. But should be fun. But good luck for everyone's muscadines, and I hope you all have delicious fruit to munch on right now.
The information on the workshop in the chat box. So I think there were some people that joined a little bit later and had questions about when that was and where it was. So that information is in there. It is not currently on our events and classes page yet. That gets updated here, I believe sometime in the next couple weeks. But the information is there. So if you are interested, you can always reach out now on our website. And I think I put that on there too. And you can just reach out and say, hey, I want to be signed up for that workshop. Or honestly, you could probably just show up on that date and time, and no one's going to turn you away. So it's actually in the community garden there at Vines Park, which is in the front of Vines Park. And we'll just meet in the parking lot right outside the gate for that community garden. But it should be really good. I'm looking forward to it. We'll get some good instruction on what to do, especially if you've got some vines that are a little out of control and need some help, and you're not sure where to start because sometimes it can be a little intimidating, especially if you haven't really had to deal with that before. So, any other questions? You got your shot here, last minute, throw them in there. Um, let's see. Yes, could the link be reposted? Yeah, I'll do that here. Copy
And
it.
I will send Lisa, I will send you a PDF of the presentation that you can distribute as you need.
Yes. And I do record. So this particular program was recorded and it will be posted on the Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel. If you're not sure where that is, if you're not handy with searching for it, you can always reach out to me and I will provide you the link. I just reposted the information for the second part of this series, the workshop. There is another question. Will we learn how to propagate?
So we will not really be talking about that during the workshop. Um, that is a there's some research looking at. So we a lot of times we do hardwood or softwood propagation. Muscadines are a lot trickier to propagate than other bunch grapes, which can be very easy. And so we're doing some other refinement on that going forward. But at least we probably won't talk about that much during the session. But I can put a note that we can at least kind of touch on it. I'll hopefully have some um, stuff to add for that. So that's a good question.
Okay. Anybody else? Last minute questions? Okay. I think that's basically it. Thank you so much, Dr. Louder, for coming and spending this lunch hour with us and telling us about muscadines. We appreciate that. And we will appreciate seeing you in December when you come all the way out here and have to brave traffic. It won't be too bad. It's only on the eastern side of the county. And again, that workshop is open to everyone, not just master gardeners, homeowners, and even out of county folks that would like to learn a little bit more about it. So if you know anybody in surrounding metro counties that's interested and would like to learn more, you can definitely share that. So that's basically it. Thank you all for coming and have a good rest of the day. Thank you. Bye bye.
See you, everybody.